Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me today. I am joined by Joe Belcastro. He is a prolific writer who spent years as a journalist covering the film industry and local nightlife. He's a former syndicated film critic who later became head writer and producer for WWE television programming, hunkering down in writers' rooms and traveling all over the world, executing storylines in major arenas. Most recently, he is the author of the Dominature trilogy, a genre-bending alt history journey combining the world-building style of epic metaphysical fantasy and adventure. And I'm going to add one more thing before I officially welcome Joe to the show. We've never met in person, but we've connected on social media through writing circles for probably more than a decade. And I can tell you, he is one of the nicest guys, always goes out of his way to support other writers. He probably doesn't even remember all the times he's liked and shared stuff I've done in the past. So I'm really excited, Joe, that you've joined me today. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. And I was thinking about that. I know we've never met, but we did start communicating, I think, from our examiner.com days. Do I have that right?
You do. I
Okay.
forgot. I was writing about yoga and spirituality at the time.
Yes. Yep. And I was just starting as the film critic. Um, and that's where all this started to kind of begin. And then 15 years later, here we are.
I know. One of these days, I hope to get to meet you in person. You're not that far away. But the reason why you kind of stayed in mind is a lot of times writers are like, read my work. Here's my book. Here's my thing. And you specifically would go out of your way to like support other people. And that really means a lot to me and led to this conversation today.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to think of others. I think we rise by lifting others. That's one of my mantras in life. And you got to practice that and you got to make sure you stick to it. And if somebody asks, if I do have a connection with them, of course, I
Yeah.
will take a look at whatever you think I could be helpful with.
Cool. Now, I know you've answered this question a bazillion times, but for this audience, share a little bit more about your life and work prior to the author that you are today.
Well, I'll take it from like college. How about that?
Okay, go for it.
Because that's where I got a taste for writing and doing TV. And I was a big fan of WWE at the time. I think it was still WWF, for those that are in the know about that. And we started just doing this little, I will say, immature wrestling show, trying to mimic what we saw on TV because storylines became a part of professional wrestling. It wasn't just these larger than life characters. So I started doing that. My friends followed me into this madness. We recorded it. Eventually, it became popular at my college, and they gave us money to do a show in the basketball arena. So we sold tickets, and that was kind of my first taste of that. And I was like, "Ooh, I like this. I want to
Yeah.
do this forever. This is the dream job." But it didn't happen right away, and I'll kind of get to that in a expedited manner. So after college, I just took HR jobs. And it was a weird time with the economy. This was like in the early 2000s. And I took recruiting jobs. I landed in HR. I eventually moved to Tampa and took an HR job there. And then I was just like, all right, what am I doing? Like this isn't me. I always use the joke, I'll beat it to death because I don't like dressing like a PJ golfer, which is basically khakis and a polo. It's clearly not me.
Yeah.
Not saying I have style, but it's just not me. And so I left, and then I was like, all right, writing. Writing's always been there, whether it's been songs, whether it's been, little movie reviews in like this random site that nobody knows about. Like I wanted to do that. And so then I saw this calling for this new thing called examiner.com, and I just jumped in. And from there, it steadily grew. And then I was writing for newspapers and I was writing for, that was like the online buzz. So, like, there's a site in LA that was pretty big with movies and comics and stuff like that. So they let me write an op-ed and it's all kind of went places, film criticism being um, my main focus at that time. And then all of a sudden, you know, I get a phone call from a student that I spoke to at his college about film and TV because there's a lot of those schools around Tampa. And he goes, I just met somebody from WWE and your name came up because I said I used to live in Tampa. And they're like, oh, have you heard of Joe Belcastro? And I was like, what? And so anyway, they called the next day and then they offered me a job. And
Wow.
then next thing I know, well, I mean, I did the interview process, but a month later, I'm in the writer's room at the place I always wanted to be. And it was essentially, writing a television show. And then that just went on and on and on. And I was great. I was right where I wanted to be. I'm very fortunate that I can say that. I got to achieve a dream. And then all of a sudden I was like, I want to do something else.
A new
And
dream.
yeah, I didn't see it coming. Books were not on the bingo card at all. And I don't know. I just knew it was a time to give it a shot. I have the ability to do that. And here we are. How about that?
Yeah.
I think that was condensed
That was
enough.
perfect. And you must have some really good karma to have that open up to you, which is funny considering the nature of the book. So, talk about
Uh,
Dominature. How did the idea hit you?
the idea was always like, so for me, I'm a student, obviously, from the film criticism world, but even before that, I loved movies. And I really love horror movies, but I also like these epic movies that deal with mythology. Some say it's fantasy, some, say it's just more metaphysical stuff. But I was always gravitating to like movies like The Prophecy and
Mhm.
Constantine and The Devil's Advocate, and I'm sure I'm missing some, even End of Days, that cheesy Arnold Schwarzenegger action flick against the devil. And I was like, man, I would love to have this ultimate Lord of the Rings type trilogy of God versus the devil, the ultimate protagonist versus the ultimate antagonist. But like, how do you do that as a fantasy? And I actually wrote about this in 2012 in one of those articles for that LA site I mentioned, where like they'd have me write this thing about if I could make it, meaning if I was a studio head, what would I greenlight, what would I not, all that kind of stuff. And I wrote an article about that, and I had these ideas of like, here's what the angels should look like, here's how you make God and devil the focus characters, and it's just a big action-packed thing, right? And then all of a sudden it came back to me in this was 2020, and I'm sitting on my balcony and I'm listening to one of my favorite bands called the 69 Eyes. And I started thinking about that dynamic of God versus the devil. I don't know why it popped in my head then. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, what if the devil banished God from heaven? It's like, oh, there's a premise that no one's ever done. And how do I know this? Because for the next month, I researched everything to
Yeah.
make sure nobody, even like, not just the mainstream authors or film writers or anything
Yeah.
like that. Like I looked at like indie authors that might have had an idea, tried to self-publish a book. I checked everything. I'm like, no one's ever done that dynamic of devil banishing God. Now, every time I say that, I'm wondering someone's going to eventually catch me and say they did, or to say the show kind of did it or whatever. But so when I had that, I outlined the whole thing. It just kind of came to me, and then I sat on it for about another month. I was like, all right, I want to write this story. And I'm like, it's going to be a book. It can't be a movie script. Uh, and I'm like, let me take the long way and write the book and see if I can learn this author world and eventually get it popular enough to then somebody wants to adapt it. So the whole premise was just like when I had that unique idea and then my love for things like Lord of the Rings and like how Christopher Nolan, who's a director who did like the Dark Knight trilogy, and how he takes an approach to these larger than life characters. I'm like, let me see if I can meld that together and spit something out. And now, I started that in 2020, towards the end of 2020, and I finished the trilogy earlier this year.
No.
And it's been a learning experience, this author world. But that's how the whole author process came into my life and how I just kind of embraced it and went for it and let's see what I can do with it.
Yeah, and it's very cool that you took some people have an idea and they talk themselves out of it before they execute it. You're like, what if? Okay, I'll give it a try. Like just the willingness to embrace something you haven't done before is pretty cool. I'm curious what made this story important to tell. Was it just for entertainment, or do you spend a lot of time grappling the what ifs of the universe, or is it a combination?
It's definitely a combination. I'm not a religious person, but I don't, I'm not a Satanist either, even though some people at these book festivals have
We'll
labeled
get
me
into
that
that.
right away. Yeah. No, I like to go down some paths of just like of having perspective. Like there's more than just what's on the surface, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know what that is. And if everyone's honest with themselves, nobody knows what that is yet. We will find out when we die. It's just my opinion. Now, there's energies obviously we can tap into, uh, and I do believe in that. And just the way the world was at the time, 4 years ago, we got a little bit of a shakeup, right?
Yeah.
And I think that might have played into some things, but I don't think even if there was no pandemic, I still would have had the same kind of running social commentary in the story. But I
Mhm.
was also mindful, like, don't get preachy and remember what you wanted to do with this. This is just basically from that 2012 article I wrote. I want to make this epic. I love what Peter Jackson did with Tolkien's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to do, but I also wanted to ground it in reality a little bit. And so, yes, am I making some observations? As I said, the social commentary. Yeah, but am I also having fun with this and trying to take you on a ride? Yes. Is there themes and tones that are woven in there from things I love to watch, like a Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
Of course.
Mhm.
Um, but in the end, I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. I am not trying to um, call anybody out. I am just like, what's a unique story? Because I wanted to do something. I'm going to not risk, but I left my dream job. Um, I probably could have stayed there a few more years and been good for life. But I was like, I have the energy now to do this. But if I'm going to do it, come in there with some gusto because it's such a crowded field and
Yeah,
everyone's
for
seen
sure.
everything now because there's so many streamers, there's so many books, which I had no idea that so many people take a chance writing books. That was a eye opener for me.
Yeah.
But you
Particularly
have to,
since 2020. Because when I published
yeah,
my book in 2020, it was really easy to get reviews. People were downloading and reading. And by 2024, it's like everybody seemed to figure out what we were doing and say, hey, I want to do that too. It's like, no, no, go back to your office.
yeah. It seems like the sweet spot in the author world, especially the indie publishing world, was 2016 to 2020. If you got in there, you could ride a wave. Not saying the wave is gone, but it is just there's a lot of people out in the ocean trying to get that same wave right now.
Yeah. And I think the whole industry is going to change in the coming future. But enough about that because I am intrigued. What intrigued me about book number one in this series is that you answer a question that many people ask when bad things happen. How can God allow this? And your
Mhm.
explanation is a really nice hypothesis that can stand up to other theories about the universe. So you touched on it a little bit. How have your personal beliefs shaped the series? Total fiction, or is it's I think you kind of say it's a kind of a hybrid.
Yeah, I especially in this so the whole trilogy is still in its early phases, right? Because I am not forget what I did in TV land, right? Like I'm not a well-known author by any means. I started from the bottom again. And so I'm still trying to push it out there, even though it's been 2 years since the first book. So I'm kind of not saying like, oh no, this is just me talking through the characters or something like that. Sometimes it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's completely made up. It's just I needed a dynamic. I needed a person or a character to balance out this other character's point of view. So I'm not going to say that I remember that particular spot you're talking about. Strangely, I'm kind of forgetting the characters that were talking at that point
I do too.
because
I have to go through my books when I write the third book, and I'm like, wait, what did they say there? What did they do there? And I have to go read my own writing sometimes.
and I was just talking to one of my best friends who's he's reading all the books. He's on the third book, and he goes, "Man, I can't wait if this gets picked up." Because I wrote it in a cinematic way. It's just
Yes.
kind of how I think people are going to digest books going forward because we're so trained to watch short form content on social media and the way streamers are going. Like everything's more visual, so like you don't need to spend 5 pages describing something because guess what? We've all seen it. So you can say, hey, they walked in the damn castle. Here we go. You know, um, a little bit better than that.
Yes, of course.
But yeah, so he was saying like, man, there's just so many characters to keep track of sometimes. Like, yeah, that's the problem with writing fantasy. If you're, well, not problem writing fantasy. It is tougher on us because we have to keep track of all this stuff for continuity. But if a reader's never read Tolkien,
Hmm.
right, or any like George Martin or whoever,
Yeah.
like it's an adjustment to get used to that style of writing because they weave in a lot of side stories. They weave in a lot of like you go away from the main character for a while,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's tough. And some people don't like that at all. Um, but to the original thing, it's just like, yeah, so some of these people that I've invented are definitely from, my experiences, and then some of the other ones are just completely like I've seen somebody like that, and I had to study maybe somebody from that's in a fictional world or who does exist in the real world, and I just kind of go through their history and like what makes them tick. Why do they act this way? Why do they project themselves out to the
Yeah.
world like this?
So, and it's interesting. It was always in the back of my mind. You said three things that I was thinking about in reading your book. People ask me all the time, "Are you your character?" And you said sometimes yes, sometimes no. But I'm always taken aback by that because as writers, a normal person is boring. So we want to squeeze them and throw stuff at them and give them mental health issues because that makes them more interesting and a place to grow. So when I have a character that does some really outlandish things and they're like, "Is that you?" I'm like, "Do you, do you get the impression that that's me? Like, should I be worried?" So I found it interesting that you said there's little elements of you, but I imagine you do the same thing for effect, right? Blowing these characters, like, what can I throw at them next?
Yeah, and again, that's why I will never reveal what really came from me because there are some statements, especially early in that book, where you're just like, what did he say? Why did like he wants to eradicate a whole generation? It's
Yeah, yeah.
is that how I feel? I'll never tell you.
Well, that's
But
that's probably
that's
for the best.
yeah, so you have to think about that stuff.
And it's interesting because when I was reading it, I could visualize it in my head, like I'm seeing it on a movie screen. And I tend to do that when I write my own books. Like I have a soundtrack in my head for the characters, like I can almost see the credits. So it's interesting that because I could feel that in the book, that cinematic quality. And I also noticed like when you're talking about like the morning stars versus like present day, as you move through time, the style of writing changes a little bit. So it was good for me once you kind of wrap your head around it as a reader because it gave us a point in time and a reference. So I liked the style changes.
And that
So,
was a lot of risk with all that stuff. The
oh, for sure.
syntax of the morning stars, I'm like, because I hit you with it right away.
Yeah.
And and I knew that was a conscious decision. I'm like, all right, people are, and this, on Kindle Unlimited, people can read the first, whatever is to 20 pages, I don't know, right? And so I'm hitting you with 10 pages that aren't like, they don't coddle you. They don't bring you in and like, welcome to my world.
Yeah.
Here's a
Right.
nice little story. No, I'm like, I'm hitting you right in the face with something, and you're either going to dig it or not. And that's something that am, I don't think it was the wrong step, but I know it's definitely deterred people from digging into the book.
Yeah. And the other thing that deterred people, so we could because I follow you on social media, you've gone to some different festivals and you've
Yeah.
gotten flack from religious people who seem to think you're anti-religion, but they haven't read your book because I think they'd feel differently if they read it. How do you navigate people like that?
So I was prepared for that.
Yeah.
Look, when you have a banner that says, "What if the devil banish God from heaven?" Um, and you're going to the one I always highlight is the Mississippi Book Festival, which
Yeah.
is Bible Belt World, right? You just prepare yourself like, hey, there's gonna be some people that are just gonna be like, what's wrong with him? Or why is he spreading this, whatever they want to call it, propaganda or whatever. And you just let them say their piece.
Yeah.
And I always just this is how I am. I will listen to you, and I will tell you like, oh, that's something I should, think about. And but I always tell them, hey, look, this is fiction. You don't know who I have winning
Yeah.
at the end. And so they make assumptions. I think what they see, and it's just funny how like the human mind works, right? And you might love this
Yeah.
part you could of this discussion. They don't see the what if the devil banished God. What they see is what if the devil killed God. That's what they read.
Huh. Yeah.
They don't know what the word banished means. And
Yes.
and and so their knee-jerk reaction is to, and it's not like they sit there and they walk up to me and they read the back of the book. A couple of them have. No, they fire right at you quick and about just their disdain for what am I doing, spreading that the God is not real and the devil won. And you see it on like ads and like comments boards like this could never happen, this could never happen. Like, yeah, that's why I wrote a fiction book about it. You know?
That's why it's an alt history. It's not supposed to be, and it's funny, you might have had this in early days writing articles. I used to get that where people would have a knee-jerk reaction to the title and then they'd angry type and I'd write back politely, "Did you read the article? Because we're saying the same thing." Or that's not what this is about. So, and why I find that interesting about people who are giving you a hard time is based on what I've read, no matter where you land spiritually, you've obviously given it thought. You've obviously put some research in because I was noticing a blend of like Greco-Roman history, some myth, the alternate timeline with a lot of biblical references. I almost wonder if you did more research than some of the people who are yelling at you. How much research
Oh,
went
no.
into this?
Oh, and that was fun. The research part's fun.
Yeah,
I looked at everything because I wanted to make. I was very uber logical in this because I was like, all right, let's not just, there's that movie Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, right? It was something that came.
I'm sure my husband has seen it, but I have not.
It's based on I'm forgetting the author's name, but it was a movie during one of the last movies I reviewed before I went to WWE.
Okay.
And it's just simply like, all right, we're gonna take Abraham Lincoln, we're gonna put him in the Civil War, and then like, but he's a vampire hunter. And that's it, right? And that's fine. It was fun, great. Me, I wanted to make sure, like, all right, if I'm gonna take, say, the Jesus character, I want to find out exactly what he did so I could my alt history can kind of be like, wait a minute, what if this really, I wanted to make the reader think
Yeah.
maybe this really did happen a different way. Maybe there's a way to tweak it where you can think like, oh, I can see why he would think that way.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I looked at all these time periods. You mentioned the Roman stuff. Like I studied a lot about Nero. I learned about, the siege of like after Rome fell, like what did all those random barbarian groups do, like with Odoacer and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
these are names people think I made up. I'm like, no, this person's real. Other characters I made up. But yeah, I went through all of it because I wanted to make sure I could blur the lines. So like I wanted to just make people think like, okay, there's some truth to what he's saying because that's what we know, but like maybe this is how it did happen. Maybe Judas did this. And the religious part and the biblical part was the foundation to kind of get it started. But once you get past it, and I would say probably halfway through the first book, books two and three, um, you kind of lose the religious spot other than what I how I frame the devil character and the God character. It's ones that we know, like I was kind of saying, but not necessarily how they came to be, as we have been told. And so that was the fun part. And so, but you have to do the research because if I just, it helps you too because you keep yourself in check knowing like where these people came from, so you don't have any continuity flaws in the story. Because when you write fantasy, there's all these little twists and turns and you have to justify why this person's doing this or why this logically makes sense and how to weave in a sword like and how does somebody carry it around in the modern times and like all that stuff. So like that's why the genre bending thing I threw in there later on in the blurbs because it could be a turnoff for people because some people just don't
Yeah.
want to open their mind that much and I get that. Sometimes you just want a mindless piece of entertainment. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm watching the Chucky series, Child's Play doll,
Yeah.
at night just to kind of zone out and just have something simple to
Yeah.
enjoy. But some people want, the Memento of Christopher Nolan, or some people
Yeah.
want, um, Inception all the time. And I think I kind of err to that. I like the challenging stuff.
Yeah, and I like that you blended the genre. Like I'm writing one now that I have the romantic comedy aspect, which is much more simple, and I've got this mystery, and I'm saying, can I weave it together or am I going to lose people? And you do lose, sometimes you do lose people. I've had
Yep.
people on my mystery or my sci-fi series where they're like, one reviewer, there were twists and turns. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know what was going to happen, but it was a little too much thinking than I wanted to do 3 stars. And I'm like, but it's a mystery. I want you to know before the characters know so you feel smart, but not by page 3. And I think they wanted to know from page 3. And I'm like,
Eh,
okay, well, not going to please everybody. So when I'm reading your book, and I'm like, okay, if they think my stuff is complex, wait till they wait till they get a load of this because you there's a lot of thinking. Um,
yeah, you have to focus. And aren't the 3-star reviews the worst ones? Because, you know, it's like you just got friend zoned.
yeah.
Um, Give me the 4 or 5 or give me the 1 or 2. Don't give me the three. The three is just like the three is such a buzzkill. I just realized that because I got a couple 3-star reviews.
Particularly when it's right out the gate, if it's something new and it's like, oh man, come on now. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, oh, like you can't go anywhere from that because you don't know if they're going to give you another chance or if they're just going to never talk about it to somebody else. Like,
and
at least if
yeah,
they
yeah.
slam it to other people, and
Yeah.
it's actually a way to get the book out there, word of mouth.
And I wonder how many people, for example, whenever I've run a promo and I'm about to hit number 1 in a category, all of a sudden a 1 star will come in. And I've noticed it happen to other authors. So I don't know whether it's somebody trying to knock you out of the spot. So I've had some people myself, and I've noticed it with other authors where they're like, climate change isn't real, 1 star. Like they don't even read the book, they read the description and they're like, I've decided I'm not going to like this. And I'm going to, and they haven't given it a chance. So that's the way I
Yeah.
justify the bad reviews when it's a star and they don't tell me. Because if it's a 3 star, I would at least like them to tell me, like, what was it that warranted that? But
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I wish, look, the power of ratings and reviews right now is huge for not just authors, but any business, like any business you go to. Hey,
yeah,
make sure you leave a review. It's
yeah,
like, oh my God, really? Everybody? Like, it's Publix grocery store. You don't need my reviews. You're either gonna go there or you're not gonna go there.
yeah.
But everybody wants reviews now. Just, I don't know, it's out of hand.
Now, what are you hoping? I know there's this cinematic, making people think for sure and entertaining. Are there certain themes, or is there 1 or 2 takeaways that when people put down your book and go about their day, what do you want them to remember or learn or whatever?
I don't think there's anything. Again, I wanted first and foremost just to do a unique, entertaining story. I have my own style and nuances to it. Some people are going to like it, some are not, and I get that. But there's no message.
Okay.
Um, there's not an overlying message like, "Hey, did you get the message?" I want people to. It's provocative.
Yeah.
Um, some people say it's controversial. No, it's provocative.
Mm.
And where you land after you read it, I think as long as it makes you think about something, I don't care what direction it is,
Yeah.
that's all it is about. It's not about like, hey, you should think this way, or here's what I was trying to say. Um, and it's not like I don't like stories that are kind of open-ended. I try to put a finishing touch on it by the third book, but you always have a little bit of a tease of like what could come next. And that's life, like
Yeah.
just because you finished one era of your life, one section, whatever, doesn't mean like that's it. Like there's always a little opening to keep going and find something new. And so I think, maybe there is an answer to the question. Maybe it's just about improving your perspective overall.
And
I think
and
that,
trying on other perspectives for size, because there were some things in there where I was like, oh, I never thought about it that way. Do I believe it? Maybe, maybe not, but that's
right.
kind of cool to think of it that way, right? I think it
Yeah.
expands people's way of thinking and perception. Maybe makes them a little more open-minded, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah, look, if there was a surefire way where you can evolve your perspective,
Yeah.
you know, we're all going to be in a better spot as a society. But some people, they can't have experiences that others have, and that's not their fault.
Yeah.
But you can't be closed-minded. And we saw that obviously in the last
Yeah.
6 months of how
Yes.
closed-minded we could be, or in just how that affects us going forward. So it doesn't matter
Yeah.
which way you pick. It's just if you have more of an open mind, we can actually achieve better things than just, you know, hey, we won. Hey, we won, because that's history. That's the scariest thing about the research
Yeah.
is we are we have not evolved that much. Our
Right.
technology share has, and that makes us believe that we're evolving, but no, we are making the same mistakes over and over and over again,
How,
and
s- yeah.
we can't get out of the pattern, and maybe we're not supposed to.
How
And so
sad
that
is that though? If you go into, I'm sorry, go finish your thought before I jump in.
no, jump in.
If you go on ChatGPT and you want to research something, it's like, how many times in history were there book banning or book burning? It's not a one time around Hitler or recently. It's like history after, like, it'll spit out. And I'm
Yes.
like, how is it we've done this 12 times and haven't figured things out yet? Right. So you can do that with almost anything. Right. So you're right. History just keeps repeating. And I'm going to take one nerd moment as a coach because I always talk about emotional intelligence and flexible thinking because people get in their own way and can't problem solve in their lives because they're so structured. And so I'll ask them, well, is that true? What else might be true? Could the opposite be true? So your book gives people a chance to say, what happens if the opposite is true? What does that mean for what I believe? And you might be causing some existential crises. I don't know. But I think it's
Not yet,
good to
not yet.
stretch people. So did you have the outline and the characters from start to finish, or did the characters drive the story and change things along the way?
No, the trilogy, I mean, especially book one, I had that pretty tight. I knew there was only one surprise character that I didn't have and ended up being my favorite one to write. Um,
Was it
and they
evil?
showed
Evil
up.
ones are always the best.
Oh yes, totally evil. Um, Definitely evil. I knew I think I needed it, but I didn't realize where I was going to go with this one. And I'm obviously trying not to say his name. But yeah, I found that one as I got to that chapter, which is like maybe just a little before the halfway spot of book one. But overall, I knew what I wanted to do with this. There's a one I made one switch in book three. I remember I was like, and I can't say this in case anybody does read it because it'll be a huge spoiler, but there's like I switched something out and just in case I do become a famous author, I'm looking at my notebook. I have all these notes. You know
Yeah.
how they always show like Tolkien's notes or
You want to be in a
um
museum one day where they're next to Darwin's books and
yeah, if it
some of
comes
Da
to that,
Vinci's sketches.
yeah, like even like Spielberg, like he had an alternate, or sorry, George Lucas had like an alternate scene for Star Wars and stuff like that, and like people
Hey,
are
they
like,
built a
holy
whole
crap.
religion out of his stuff. So,
Right. So like you never know. So I'm like I saved some of this stuff. And yeah, but like that was the only change I made. And it's interesting, right now I'm writing a new series. I'm sure you're probably gonna get to that, but you can kind of see over my shoulder. This one I actually wrote out more general beats.
yeah.
Um, and I'm kind of, and you know this term, I believe, and it's called pantsing it, a little bit, where like a writer's writing from the
Yeah,
seat of
yeah,
his
yeah.
pants. I'm doing that a little bit more with
Yeah.
this series, but like the last one, no, I kind of knew like I knew the chapter, I knew the scenes, but I was kind of writing the whole trilogy as how would somebody see this as an hour TV show on like HBO on Sunday night, right? So and I was just fresh off writing TV, so I kind of had it all kind of detailed out. I didn't divert from it too much unless I reread it at the very end, when you're
Yeah.
doing your final pass and you're like, all right, this is too complex. That first, the only thing I've said in other interviews is like chapter three of book one was originally chapter one,
Yeah.
and I swapped them. That's the only major change I made after I got through the whole thing. Like, this is going to be more of a risk, but this is more powerful chapter rather than just your standard, ease them into it. because everyone's
That
read
is
those.
good discipline on your part. So I am half organized, half pantser. Like when I wrote the trilogy for the data collectors, I wanted one book and I didn't have enough
Yeah.
time, so I kept going. And the characters changed and they took over and they would do things and I would let them and I'd be like, wow, I didn't see that coming and I'm the writer. So um, the structure, I'm curious with your next series if there's more of that, um, because I found that I had a skeletal structure and then things would kind of move and weave and the story would take a different direction. And as long as I ended at the finish line, it was okay. And your structure is the way classically trained writers should do it. I did it wrong, but if I did that outline, I would have never started the book. So I'm like, you know what? I just need to dive in. So
All right. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm a big my training was WWE.
yeah,
I might add a sense of storytelling just because I consumed so much of it, but the structuring of it really was like I learned so much being in that writer's room and from people that have done it way longer than me at the time. And that helped me. I think that was a huge reason why I was able to take on a book. And whether you like the story, again, can't control it. But the only guarantee I'll make, it's structured right, it's paced right, everything makes
yeah,
sense. Whether you like what I did with it or the direction I went with it, can't control that. Nobody can. But having all those characters to jumble in the WWE show, because there's a whole cast of characters
yeah.
on a 2, 3 hour program, and they're all different personalities, and you have to learn how to like, balance things out. Um, so I think that I'm just naturally going to always outline something. And there's an outline behind me. It's just it's not as intense as or as in depth as the Dominature trilogy.
Yeah. So we have a few more minutes. Can you give us a teaser about the next series? Is it a secret or can you share a little bit
No,
about what's next?
I did an interview, might have been 2, 3 months ago, and I wasn't sure if I was going to write another, like if I want to stay in the author world. Like it was a eye-opening thing. I'll get to the question. Don't worry.
No worries.
Um, but I wasn't sure if I was going to write another book, and I was like, maybe I'll just go back to movie stuff or TV stuff.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was like, I had this idea with this vampire, something with a vampire, because I wanted to go to horror, and because
Okay.
I love it. As I said earlier, I love it, and I've never really written horror yet. And so then, fast forward now, yes, I'm doing horror. It's no longer a vampire though, because as I was outlining, I realized the story didn't work with the vampire character,
Huh.
and I loved the story. At least I loved the story,
Yeah.
but the vampire wasn't working. So I had to tweak it and make it a different antagonist. But yes, it's a horror story. It's actually going to be just 2 books, and both are outlined. And I have a feeling that it's going to come out. Both of them will be out next year. It'll be done. This is a lot easier to write because it's just straightforward. I'm not trying to make a point. I'm not trying to take you on a wild ride with twists. Like this is just basically, can I do something scary? And this is a genre I've always loved,
Yeah.
and I might as well give it a shot. And I also think having a different book series, and this is more of a marketing business ploy. I was like, let me see, like maybe this will be the one to catch on, and then it pulls up Dominature, or maybe Dominature does catch on, right? And then
Yeah.
but then you have this other thing here that people can gravitate towards. And so it was a decision of like, I want to kind of have more before I leave the author world.
Yeah.
I have a feeling no matter how these books perform, this horror series might be my last, and then we'll see
Okay.
where I go next. But yeah, this is fun to write. I mean,
Is it
it's
scary horror or is it going to be so my husband laughs at me. He'll when we watch things he'll say it's only PG-13, it's Danielle friendly because when it's something that's like violent, I'm looking like this like oh because I'm hypersensitive. So is this book like a scary or is it like horror? Like will I be horrified and have to read it like this?
so I don't know because one of my tricks in life is I don't read other people's work. So, and I do that on purpose because I want things to be fresh from my brain.
Yeah.
So I've never really read Stephen King, so I'm not sure how he horrifies people with his words. I have a vision in my head how I do it and how I think it's going to be effective and how I've seen it work in certain scales, when I did TV, but like that was more visual, right? But if you read it on the page and then like the whole writing team's like, all right, yeah, we can go with this, then obviously you wrote it effective enough.
Yeah.
That's where I think. And I did that with movie reviews. I never read, I'm not a trained journalist. Like I didn't read any other of the well-known film critics at the time. I just kind of just like, all right, what would I want to read in a review? And
Yeah.
that's how I think I kind of got myself woven in a little bit and got some recognition for it.
Yeah.
So is it going to be scary? Yes. Is it going to be gruesome, like torture porn type stuff like Saw? No, I don't like that stuff either. Here's what I'll give you. It's the first book. It's going to feel like Jeepers Creepers, if you know that movie, meets It, Stephen King's It.
Okay. Okay.
But again, I'm basing this on the movies. I don't think Jeepers Creepers has a book, but I've never read it,
Yeah.
and that's an undertaking. I think it's like 1,000 pages.
There's going to be some interesting to read it because I think where my imagination and the reader's imagination goes, I'm curious to see if it's what you've written because when it's something like horror, I think our minds can take us into dark places with just a little push. So I'd be curious to read it. Look forward to it. Where can people go to learn more about you and your work?
Just go to my website, joebelcastro.com, and that way you can find my Instagram and there's a free ebook to the Dominature series. It's 40 pages. It's like a prequel. I call it a gateway into the series. It's all fresh. It's not like just the first four chapters of book one. It's completely something I wrote just to give away for promos and stuff like that. Called Dominature Hellrise. And that's the best way. Look, in the perfect world, go to my website, follow me on Instagram because I'm trying to shed all the social media I possibly can. Um,
Yeah.
I don't think we're gonna need all this at us. Like, so I'm trying to drop the Twitter. I'm trying to drop maybe one of my Facebook groups. Like, I
Yeah.
just want to streamline it.
That
If you
would be
want to
my
follow,
dream to like
yeah,
never have to go on social media to promote my books again and just have them be.
yeah. I mean, you need it, and I'm fine doing it. But like, I'm thinking like at this point, everyone has an account for everything. So why do I need to be posting on multiple sites?
Right.
I think we're gonna get away from that. So I'm like, I'm just trying to like, all right, Instagram, I kind of strangely I don't mind. So I'm like, all right, everybody just go to my website, go to Instagram. I mean, if you join my Facebook group, you can find that there too. But yeah,
Okay.
that's where a good place
And
to
I will
start.
have everything in the description of this episode to find all those links and to go and buy your book. Joe, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed your questions. They were some unique ones. Thank you.
Take care.